Hi, I'm Joe Bauman, and I'm a prime finance expert and on Prime Finance's board. I'm here with Doug Summa, who will be talking about valuation practices and standards, a topic that comes up often when working in the financial markets and related litigation. Doug's full bio is available on our Prime Finance website, but briefly, Doug spent his career with PricewaterhouseCoopers, retiring recently as a senior partner in its risk management practice. Doug's area of interest has been in valuation issues, and since his retirement, he's been involved with a group called the International Valuation Standards Council, or the IVSC, and is its vice chairman of its financial instruments board. Doug's also a prime finance expert. Now, before turning it over to Doug, I'd like to mention that this primetime session is in two parts. The first one lays the groundwork for why valuation principles are important. The second will focus on how valuation standards are applied. Now, Doug, you spent your career at PwC involved in developing, implementing, and evaluating various valuation approaches for a wide variety of corporations, both financial and industrial, both public and private, and also public sector entities. But let's start with the basics. In what types of situations is valuation important?
Joe, first of all, thank you for having me. And yeah, you're hitting sort of a critical issue that I have spent a lot of my time, a lot of my life worrying about. So sort of why does this all matter? So when I think about valuations, they really underpin an awful lot of decision making that really truly is important. So things around investments, capital allocation, and even more broadly, broad financial stability and economic growth. But as I looked at it from my vantage point, in a firm like PwC, but also just looking at the way various firms dealt with it, valuation approaches were could be very different across similar products, and that was always something that was a challenge uh, for people, users, to really understand. I think we were able to make things make sense, or I know we were able to make things make sense for ourselves, but it was really trying to think about how do users, how do financial institutions, investors, regulators really understand the quality of the values that they're looking at. And so, since I have retired, I've gotten much more focused in on trying to make sure that that valuation standards are there and they help really get to the a level of reliability so that the values that are coming out can be relied upon by third parties, investors, and regulators. So just to give a little bit more context for the breadth of what at least I've been thinking about and the IVSC has been thinking about is really, where are these standards used? And so an example is typically financial reporting. Many people think of this as being very focused in on financial reporting. However, it's really broader than that. And when we think about the various uses, we think much more broadly. So things around M&A activity, opinions on value, financing, litigation or arbitration, where it is difficult to determine the magnitude of losses, for example. Valuation skills, are very important. Insurance, figuring out the magnitude of a loss. Tax is also an area where, very complicated, and therefore we find that there's a lot of need to understand value within the tax structure, asset-based and mortgage lending, asset sales. And one that we've really been spending a lot more time thinking through is in terms of capital, where it's not really the value, but it is a stress scenario that is really being asked of people to understand and provide information on.
Um, so that kind of takes us to the point of now that you have retired from PwC, and I've mentioned you're putting a lot of your time now in work with the IVSC. How does the work of the IVSC fit into this broader picture of valuation and its standards?
Yeah, the IVSC is is an organization that really has a very seemingly simple mission, which is to build trust and valuation. And the way the IVSC is accomplishing this is doing two things. One is that we have our standards, our technical standards, and they're designed to ensure consistency, transparency, and comparability of valuation. But in addition to that, we not only think about the technical side, but we also think about the side of sort of what is a professional, what should a professional look like? And so we have guidance on that. And so we think through a combination of saying what one should do, how one should think about evaluation, and then making sure that the right people are doing it, or at least we have guidance on what those people should look like. That's really how we're trying to do this. I should stress that our standards are principle-based, and the technical standards really look at a process. How do you start with the requirements of what you want to value and why, through to how do you actually communicate that? How do you describe that? And all of the processes and judgments that go along that entire process. So that's the way our standards work. We work very closely with standard setters, regulators, valuation professional organizations, and a broad range of providers in this space to try to make sure that we not only think about our standards in as standard setters, but also really make sure that the breadth of those parties who are involved in the valuation process have some impact on what we're doing. So maybe it'd be helpful for me to talk a little bit about who's really in the IVSC. So we have over 200 members, and our members include people who perform valuations, people who use valuations, whether they are regulators, whether they're investors, and we also have some professional organizations who are included. So again, as I said earlier, we're really trying to make sure that we have members who are contributing to aspects of the valuation process. And our members are very active. They are truly engaged with trying to help us accomplish our mission. But in addition to just the way the members give us insights into what we should be thinking about, I should be clear that our process is very open. We have a lot of various forums to get outside stakeholder feedback. So we issue papers on what we are thinking about, what topics that we are trying to figure out, even if we have our own, in my case, personal point of view. What is it that really is required by all of the various parties across the value or the ecosystem of valuation? So we issue perspective papers. The other thing is that any standard that we issue, it goes through a very robust comment process. So again, these are not just our ideas. These are ideas where we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort to make sure that we're getting the best ideas we have, but also we think through the trade-offs and that people need to go through, but also we need to go through as we set standards that are broadly applicable across the issues of valuation, which I should stress range across any sort of asset, any sort of liability. So it's a very, very big topic. The next thing, though, that I do want to talk about is sort of where does the IVS, how do the IVS really impact um, people applying them? And so professionals within 103 countries are applying the IVSs. It really comes through a couple of different ways. One, in a somewhat limited way, it is explicitly part of is part of the legal system. Where it is more typical, more is that that valuation professional organizations have adopted our standards, so their members need to ensure that they comply with our standards. And the other thing that we are finding, which I think uh, is actually a growing trend, is that there are more and more investors who use our standards as a baseline for determining whether they want to invest in something or how they measure what they are investing. So whether it's the Norwegian investment uh, process or whether it's something like the IMF. So we're seeing more of this coming in now through the investor side.
And could you speak a little bit, could you tell us something about how the international standards, work with and dovetail with other international regulatory or accounting or legal efforts and projects?
Sure. I think in addition to uh, where we have had this traction already that I was just talking about, one of the things I want to talk about is where we have a statement of cooperation with the IOSCO, and we see this as being very important since IOSCO is the Organization of Security Commissioners, and really is the way that securities regulators, a forum for security regulators to interact. And so we've been working, or IOSCO has been really looking at what we've been doing now for a little bit of time, and what's going, where we think this is going is they have been in the process of looking at our standards, process of looking at our processes, quite frankly. How do we operate? Are we transparent? Are we thinking about our mission and how we accomplish this? And they've been looking at that for a while. We anticipate relatively shortly that we should be getting some feedback from IOSCO on what we're doing. And really, we are hoping that we will end up with 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 more insight as to how we can be complementary to IOSCO. I mean, to be frank about IOSCO, it is one of these things that, valuation is critical to making sure that securities are properly regulated. And so we hopefully are going to fill a real need for them. And that's our understanding as to why that we have been going through this process with them to see how we can coordinate with them and determine whether that's consistent, what they look for us to do, whether it's consistent with our mission. So I guess what I'd like to sort of wrap up with, if that's all right, Joe, is really to
Sure.
talk a little bit about sort of, why we're here, the IVSC is here, why we think these standards are important. Valuation is both an art and a science. We look at it as a complicated combination of that. And the reason that it's science is there are formulas, there are set practices, but also valuation has an awful lot of judgment in it. At the end of the day, that judgment can lead to variability in in value. Even if those judgments are appropriate, you still can have variability in outcomes, which then leads to potential confusion by users. The way we think about valuation standards is that those standards help ensure that the values that are produced are both reliable and transparent. And we really think that that is critical. And our standards describe the processes, again, at a principle-based level, but what one should be doing and highlighting where those areas of judgment are that you need to do additional procedures. You need to get more comfort as the person performing that value and communicate some of that uncertainty to your users. So that's really where we think the valuation standards are helpful to the world, and so that's why we've been focused on that.
Well, that's thank you very much, Doug. That's been a great introduction to the topic. It's the end of what I call our part one on valuation issues and valuation standards. Thank you for putting in the time and educating us all in the use of these standards and how they could apply. Um, I'd like to encourage everybody to tune into part two of Doug's talk, where we'll focus more on the application side of valuation standards and hear more about the IVSC's work.
Thank you very much.